For all of you folks out there wondering why football's so good right now, because you have three different levels of football that are all entertaining, but one of them, they're at the Final Four. One of them's almost at the finish line, and Candid Frank, David Morisuti, and I are here to break down all the stuff from the CFL and what's going on before this weekend's East and West Final. Gentlemen, how are we doing this evening?
Okay, old guy first. Okay, I'm doing good. I'm still on the right side of the earth.
Yeah, it's good to see Frank still. Oh, you good, Frank? The screen's not going to fall on you.
No, I just figured I'd pull the screen up so that it hides everything behind me. I don't know if I can do. Can I do a green screen here?
Maybe able to. I'm not sure.
I'm fine. I'm fine. David, how are you?
I'm pretty good. Just, getting into the. It's funny because like the turnaround between this East Final and the Grey Cup, like I'm hearing guys talking about, some are flying out back home and they're right off another flight the next day. Frank, you and I go in on Tuesday, but it's like I don't have much time to think. I'm trying to think of I haven't even thought about what I need. I have to start the plan. Like Frank, I know you've done this many times before, so I think I'm gonna have to lean on you for like a.
Oh, don't lean on me because I had a show before this, and then in between, I'm doing the moderating of our Legion's first November 11th Remembrance Day. And so I was on the phone with them, and we got all kinds of meetings, and then I'm dropping a puck. I'm dropping a puck at the Silver Stick tournament. It's up here in Wasaga, and I'm doing dropping the puck at one of the championship games. I'm the vice president of Legion, first vice president, and then the president of Legion is going to do the other game. So I don't know. I like you, David. I might have experience. I don't know where I'm going to find the time to put this together, but I'm going to have to.
And then for me, I'll be next 2 weeks, I'll be covering it live for my wonderful sectional. That's right behind. It's right in front of me here. So it's all good and fun. But before we get started with anything else, it was reported today that there apparently is a big announcement tomorrow that 2026 is going to Calgary for the Grey Cup. So we'll see if that comes true or not. There was other rumors of a stadium as well, just because I believe a lot of people are saying McMahon needs a new stadium like the Flames do, but I'd have to go Grey Cup if there's anything true to the announcement. If I'm really thinking about what it's going to be.
I think the Grey Cup's already been awarded to them, hasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's officially unofficial at this point.
I'm going with your first. I'm going with your first. I'm thinking it's a stadium, only because of the people that are there.
It's the mayor, the commissioner, and then I think
Ministry of Sport.
Yeah.
I did not see this, so you guys are ahead of the ball on this one.
It was. I got an email from the Stampeders media department. Lefevre sent it. I can.
No, I'm seeing it right now. Yeah, the fact that. I mean, here's the thing. It does scream as though this is Grey Cup. It'd be nice. It would be nice if this would be.
It's definitely Grey Cup. It meets that, but I'm just saying the dark horse is the stadium.
Because correct me if I'm wrong. Next year it's in Winnipeg.
Yes,
but isn't the following year in Montreal?
I've heard Ottawa. I've heard rumors of Ottawa for 2026, and I've heard rumors of Calgary for 2026.
Okay, let's go to Google. Hurry up, David. Come on.
I know that. So I know that the Elks and Stampeders put in a bid to host the 2026 Grey Cup. So, I mean, and that was something our good man Mark Stevens had reported on. So he's saying it's most likely a Grey Cup to Calgary. So
they have to call one for sure.
It's just my thinking is this would be 2 Grey Cups in Calgary within the last 10 years.
I think 2019 was the last one in Calgary.
Yeah. 2019 Calgary hosted. Toronto has had one Grey within. Okay, yeah, they had 2012 and they had 2016. They haven't had one, and there hasn't even been one close. Now, granted, there is something happening within the next couple of years at BMO Field that probably precludes them from wanting to do. But I think 2027, if you're for anyone that wants to know in Toronto, I think 2027 would be a safe option that Toronto could
You know
look
why,
into.
right? You know why, right? There's going to be 45,000 reasons why.
45,000 means I think they'll want to take advantage of every single one of those.
It's
Oh,
going
yeah.
to be 45,000 reasons why it's going to come to Toronto, and why they don't care that it's not here in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the only other stadium too that, like, obviously, I think this year with Vancouver as well. I think it's the first one in almost 10 years, if I'm wrong. I think 2014 was the last one as well, so they don't get it. I know Ottawa, it's been almost 10 years too, so I know they're chomping at the bit. And then Montreal, I just think until something's done with Olympic Stadium, I don't think they'll go back there because they're obviously not going to hold it at Molson, just because I don't think the seating capacity is enough to what logistically it is. Because, like, look, when you have all these other stadiums where you can get at least 30, 40, or in the case of the Grey Cup, I know I was going to say 50 for next week, but I know over 45,000 tickets are sold. I don't know the official number, but I know they're north of 45. Just because I've been seeing stuff today where people are like doing all that stuff there with just people posting numbers online and stuff like that. I'm like, I don't know if there's anything confirmed or not. I've just seen 45. But no, going back to this, like I said, stadium is the option that should be announced, but more than likely it's going to be probably the Grey Cup getting announced.
Yeah. I think, and actually, I'm pretty sure back in the summer, the Bombers had put out the ticket prices for the Grey Cup. So they're getting people already ahead of time. I think it starts at $199 and it could go up to as much as $500 a ticket, which wouldn't sound so bad for a Grey Cup. Frank, you and I know the 2016 at BMO Field, that was an expensive ticket.
Oh, absolutely.
But like, again, I don't know. The thing is, I don't know if people realize, like, this is the Super Bowl of Canada. You're not going to cheapen it and have it the same price as a regular season game.
Yeah.
Right.
No, it's never going to be the same price. And the prices are pretty ridiculous sometimes. And it also depends on the venue, right?
And where it's being, I was to say where it's being held, the desire for people to go out and shell out money for it.
Yeah, because you know, well,
you get every fan base out there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, 45,000 seats, that would be around what you're saying right now. So, yeah. I mean, the league would love that, right? Because the league now, you know, a few years ago, they changed it. The home teams usually kept most of the money, and that changed. Now the league gets the money. So selling a lot of tickets is a good idea as far as the league is concerned. So, and I'm looking forward to BC hosting the game. I'm also not looking forward to in a positive way, if I can stay on the same topic. I'm waiting to see what kind of reaction the local folks have that their team didn't make it. You know, David, with all that stuff. That's one of the things I'm really looking for when we go there.
Well, yeah, I know. I'm curious to see the vibe and the vibe in the. It's personally why I was hoping that the Lions would make it, just because the atmosphere I think would have been that much more amped up. Right, in a way that Hamilton being in the Grey Cup in 2021 was like that too. Now, given it was a COVID year, so it wasn't exactly full out, but I do think that having that home Grey Cup means so much. And like, the problem is there's so much pressure to get there. That's what makes it so tough, right? Like,
absolutely.
When the Riders hosted in 2022, they were nowhere close. When I'm trying to think right now, I'm not thinking.
Calgary, Edmonton,
last year, Hamilton,
Calgary
they were nowhere close either.
Calgary won in Edmonton.
Calgary won in Edmonton. Ironically, they host the next year, and they're not even in it.
Exactly.
Toronto 2016, there was never any hope that team was going to get to a Grey Cup. But I feel like that took a little bit of momentum away too. But like, it's not something you see very often, which in a good way, like in a good way, I can understand it, right? You don't want it to feel like it's a total advantage for the home nation, but at the same time, it's like being able to win, like Toronto got to experience that in 2012, the win at home, right? Frank, was that the last team to win at home, or did the
The last
Riders
win
win?
at home was the Riders.
Oh yeah,
It was BC,
2013.
Toronto. It was BC, Toronto, then Saskatchewan.
It was 3 years in a row, right?
13, yeah. It was 11, 12, and 13. 11 was BC, 12 was Toronto,
Yeah.
13 was Saskatchewan.
and I think they beat
Mhm.
Hamilton in 13, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, they did. They beat Caleros.
Yes, because I know 2012. We were talking about this. I was talking about this last week with you guys. 2012 was the Cackert game at Rogers Center, and then 2011 was, I think BC beat Montreal, if I'm not mistaken. 2011.
I don't remember.
I believe you're right, Griff. I think it was. I would think it was BC in 2011 that beat. That it was BC Montreal.
I forgot who lost.
Yeah, because I know because I was doing some prep. I was just doing a piece on the Alouettes, and I know that if they win this
Sorry,
Grey Cup,
no, it was the Blue Bombers.
Oh, it was the Blue. Okay.
Back when the Blue Bombers were in the East in 2011.
Yes, because in 2007 it was the Riders and the Bombers, who ironically the last time the Saskatchewan Roughriders beat the Bombers in the playoffs was the Grey Cup at the Rogers Center in 2007.
Very interesting. We're in for a very good weekend. Like,
Yeah,
in a way, if I don't, the Grey Cup will never ever be a letdown, but this is like probably the most exciting weekend of football the CFL will have.
Oh, absolutely. And then even looking back on it though, last weekend, like more or less, like look, we all experienced Ottawa and Toronto live, and we know what the takeaways, especially from the Ottawa perspective. But what's the big takeaway from the West semifinals with Saskatchewan and BC? Like, if you're BC, like, where do you go from here as a team? In a year you were supposed to get to the Grey Cup and you don't even get to the West Finals. So, like, that's my big question to you guys right now.
That's a really good question. You know, when you look at BC, they created a situation halfway through the year where they bring back Nathan Rourke. And as good as they tried to make it not a problem, it was a problem. On top of it being a problem on the field, you also spent a lot more money. And that team spent a lot of money that didn't produce. They went over the salary cap. Like that was confirmed by confirmed by co-general manager Neil McEvoy. Is that how you say his name? McVoy. Apologies if I did. So I think probably like they pay because a dollar for dollar fine, if I'm not mistaken, for violating the salary cap. So it's going like there's part of that part it plays, I think, a factor in it, right? You know, the owner has put in a lot of money. He's done his best to help bring this team up.
Oh, yeah.
And then what it's led to, man, to me, it's like this is going to be a tough one for that group because who accepts the blame? Because somebody has to take the fall here. Is it the GM for how he put the team together? Is it the coach for how it played out? Personally, I think the GM takes a little bit of responsibility.
But the coach is half the GM too. Don't forget.
That's right too, right? So there's a little bit of both.
Yeah. He gets more of the blame. This is the coach.
Because it's two totally different perspectives, though.
To answer your question, David, Griff, can I answer?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
To answer your question, it's the organization's fault because I don't believe going over the cap is something that the general manager without talking to the owner would do. That's my first assumption, but I think it's a calculated assumption. So they were all in on bringing in the quarterback, right? And the reason they were all in and bringing the quarterbacks because the team they put together wasn't good enough. It's just that simple. The team wasn't good enough.
I think we should have seen something too with that because, look, I know I always said, like I've said this in the last few games, that the Argonauts to play the Lions. The Argonauts were the underdog, and the Argonauts went outright. But obviously, look, there's been a lot of trouble with them, especially too with you guys referenced this last week. There was a game where they went out there a few years ago and just got whooped. But the fact that this year too, in a Toronto team that look, expectations are very low. Dukes is the quarterback. BC was supposed to come in and wipe the floor with them, and they let Toronto beat them clean. I feel like we should have viewed that as a red flag for the Lions, because why are you losing games? Like even I think it was week 4, they barely beat the Elks, who were still very bad at the time. This was before Chris Jones got fired. So BC, they can say and do what they want, but it's like they have all this flash, but they have nothing to, there's no reward, there's no end game for it. So now for 2025 in a West where there's a lot of uncertainty next year in the West, because if you already look at it, we don't know what to expect from BC. Calgary's pretty much in a last dance with Dave Dickinson, considering
they're twins. In my mind, Calgary and BC are twins. They both have the same problem: underperformance, old management.
I also think with Calgary too, there was no plan for Bo, and I also say this as well. Since Dinwiddie left, they haven't been the same team. He really took not just himself, but a lot of other pieces with him. That's just changed that organization. The fans aren't sold on Jake Mayer. They fired a whole bunch of coaches, which I think now basically is saying, Dave, for you, it's a last chance effort to really prove something, and it's not. But if it doesn't work out, Dave Dickinson's probably gone after 2025. And then you have Edmonton, where they're an upstart. We don't know what to expect. So the only team with certainty going into next year in the West really is Saskatchewan at the moment. I only say Winnipeg just because they're older and you don't know who's going to be back. But that's what we'll get into that in a bit.
Yeah. David?
Well, I look at it like this. BC, we talk about teams who find momentum at the right time and teams that lose momentum in a lot of ways at the wrong time. BC lost momentum at the wrong time of the year, right? You had a team that, again, I talk about the quarterback situation. Didn't know who their starting quarterback was going to be, because it probably should have been Vernon Adams, because he was there throughout the year. He was the guy, but then they went with Nathan Rourke. They tried it. Didn't work. All right, now we're going back to Vernon Adams. I felt like there was that friction, and Vernon Adams even admit it was not easy. He was very disappointed with how that was handled. And then you look at the defense. The defense was being exposed. I look back to their loss against Toronto. That gave teams the playbook on how to beat the Lions.
Week 1 or the game in September?
The one in September. The one that the Toronto Argonauts handedly won. And then you look at the game against Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan was making plays, right? The Lions didn't do enough in the red zone. Where we hear that one before. There's going to be some serious questions of whether to restart in a way in BC, but that's a tough ask to do. But I see a team there that just, I think maybe also just lost confidence along the way. I think coaching plays a bit of responsibility, but you got to look at the talent too as well.
The other thing too with BC as well, they really give me off, obviously it's not the same caliber team, David. I know this is a CFL show, but the team that's right down the QEW from us and over the border, they kind of need to do that where, there's some players that's going to be hard. And I'm referencing the Buffalo Bills, by the way. There is some players that you have to move on from that it's going to sting, but it's going to help the organization long-term, where it's just like, hey, there's some players, it's going to suck to lose, but you got to rip off the Band-Aid and just learn that, hey, doing this is only going to help us further with a team that, wants to win. We know ownership's committed to winning there, but you have to do the right things to put your team in the right place to win. And right now we don't know what that, because like we say too, their defense was getting exposed against Toronto. That's kind of the beginning of the end. And then the quarterback situation, you just you basically welcomed in unwanted chaos that you caused for yourself. The one bright spot there really this year was the receivers were really good with McInnes, and I'm blanking on the other guy's name, Matt Hollis, excuse me. And then running back was Stanback as well. Stanback was a really good star for them this year. So if they can figure all that stuff out, plus two, we'll see what Matthew Betts does if he does try to go back to the NFL or not. But there's a lot of questions there for a franchise that shouldn't have them, but they do anyway.
They were 5-1 to start the year. 5-1.
Yep.
And that team finished 9-9.
They had that game too where they killed Hamilton early in July, and we're like, okay, this team's looking good. And then ever since then, they kind of fell off a cliff.
Yeah, there was an emotional thing that happens when you bring in another guy into the organization, right? With that kind of, I think it really hurt the. David and I talked about this on our show, and I think it really hurt the room a little bit.
Yeah. They also were 8 for 18 on second down Saturday.
Yeah.
Right, like when you're shooting yourself in the foot that much, you're not going to win in the playoffs. Frank and I I've seen it many times. Frank and I have seen it many times. When you're not able to score with the chances that are presented to you, don't take advantage of the opportunities, you are going to lose, especially if your defense isn't able to back you up. I have seen teams play really terribly offensively, but the defense holds them in the game. And BC's defense wasn't that good to do it.
Well, we saw a good example of what happened with Toronto and Ottawa, right? Like, when you go into the playoffs, you've eliminated the teams that are not playing well at all. So you're playing teams that are better, teams that are playing probably as well as you are, right? So what that means is that you've got to be at your best to make sure you take advantage of every time they're at their worst. And that tells the story in reverse as well. Toronto looked terrible in the first half. But then reality sank in, and they acquired their confidence that they had, and they leaned on their defense, and then took the game over because they stopped making mistakes, and they stopped, basically playing poor defense. And in the playoffs, that's what you guys are both right. That's what you have to do. You have to play your best because you're playing against teams that are going to take advantage of your mistakes, and if they don't, you could win. And the reverse is true.
And Saskatchewan did exactly that Saturday night with BC. Like, look, there were some really poor turnovers Vernon Adams had. And then we all know what happened with Toronto and Ottawa, where, look, I don't want to call the squib kick the ultimate, just downer for them, but you could kind of tell when Toronto came out of half and they were firing. That's where you knew, hey, this is being taken over. When you're getting killed in time of possession, but you're in a close game, that's a red flag for a loss. With an Ottawa team that, look,
we were sitting beside each other, and I still see the looks on our faces. I need to looking at you guys to see that actually happen.
Where it's just, I can't believe they just did that. And now we have an Ottawa team that's going to be. My big thing with Ottawa for next year is they have to keep the same team together as best they can. Obviously, look, pieces move all the time. That's just the nature of sport, no matter what the sport is: hockey, basketball, football, baseball. There's a lot of that leadership core that they have to make sure that stays within the organization because they're building towards something. And if you don't do that, where you let some pieces go out the door that maybe you shouldn't, that's where things can fall apart quickly, especially in an East where Toronto, Montreal aren't going anywhere. And Hamilton's a team we know that next year's I'm not going to say is for sure, but you got to know they're probably going to be better next year.
You're basically saying they're on a curve towards winning.
Yeah.
And you don't want to waste a lot of that curve that you've built up.
It's like the uphill tick of a roller coaster, you don't want to drop.
You don't want to.
No, you don't.
You don't want to go back to the beginning. And it's funny because again, David and I have always, for the last couple of years, have always wondered, how does Ottawa lose? We see what they do in the off season. We see what they have, and they can't make it work. Now, most of that is due to unfortunate injuries. I mean, you lose your number one quarterback 2 years. You don't have a quarterback. But I think even more than rebuilding a team, you need a guy under center. What did Ottawa prove this year? Guess what we can do if we have a quarterback, right? So look at Edmonton, right? Look what we can do if we have a quarterback. I'm reaching down to teams that didn't make the playoffs too.
Yeah. That's why there's so many question marks around Calgary, because guess what? We don't know if they have a quarterback.
Right. And that's what happened. And with Calgary, they bet against Bo Levi Mitchell, who tore his ex-team apart in the last game of the year. So, but can Bo Levi Mitchell do it over the long haul? What we've learned this year is he can't. He hasn't been able to do it since his glory days in Calgary. And that's the other thing about having a good quarterback. It's that availability, the ability to be available.
Well, not only that, you had a Hamilton team that, Bo Levi Mitchell threw all these yards, but that defense changed their coordinators halfway through the year.
They were terrible the first 2 months of the season.
Right? I'm sorry, you don't. That to me was also the nail in the coffin, right? Now, is there a chance they could be better next year? There always is, but guess what? Teams around you get better too, so you have to be able to counteract what other teams will do around you as well. So, yeah, with Ottawa, they're trending in the right direction. It's just you have to ask two questions of yourself: is Drew Brown the guy, and is Bob Dice the right coach? Because now you give Bob Dice a chance, considering what turnaround they had, and a coach who, yeah, he's been coaching in this league for a really long time, but he hasn't been the head guy for a lot of time. So you're now it's tough because coaches shouldn't. Usually, you say coaches, how much allotment do you allow for a coach to learn from their mistakes? That only gets answered by the people making the decisions, right? How much of a leeway do they want to give, right? Because they could set the tone and say, not good enough. We're going in a different direction. So I'm curious to see how Ottawa plays this because they were close. First half, they were close, but they realized that if you don't take advantage of your opportunities, it's going to come back to bite you. And that loss is going to leave a lot of sour taste in people's mouths.
For head coaches, there have been a few head coaches that wouldn't have won Grey Cups if they had been fired when they had their start and weren't that, made a lot of mistakes. Dinwiddie made a lot of mistakes when he started. So the Argos showed good faith for the right reason. And there's a coach in Winnipeg that's trying to get to a 6th Grey Cup in a row, and his first year, remember, they were tar and feathering him. You got to get rid of this guy, and look what's happened. So it's to your point, David. You made the point perfectly, and that is, it's up to the person who's making that judgment call, and you got to hope that they make the right decision. Is he the right coach for Ottawa? He made a mistake. We've learned that coaches make mistakes. Great ones make mistakes.
And get called out by David if they what those mistakes backfire. Ryan Dinwiddie. But yeah, the big thing with Ottawa too is I've seen this so many times in sports where you have these upstart teams that have a taste of success, and then people think they're just going to duplicate it or get better, and then they stumble and bumble. There's a perfect example, not even of success, but they're kind of a Buffalo Sabres-ish vibe, David, where it's like they have some of the tools, they just don't know how to put it together. That's what Ottawa has to worry about. Can they put it all together to make it work? Like their other NHL counterparts too. It's the exact same thing. My big thing with them too is just who is that guy? Like how we talked to Drew Brown about, do you want to be involved in the decision makings? And we know he's a young quarterback, but we need to see that leadership element come out of him too, where he says, "Look, I'm going to give my opinion on who I want." Because look, and also I do think Bob Dice should return just because look. You got to the playoffs for the first time in 6 years. You got out of the pit of misery that you were in. So I think he deserves it. I think going out and getting someone else is just going to backfire as a whole. Go with what you know because it can only help you. If you
What if Griff, somebody comes available that is a really good a really good coach? Like I'm looking at Calgary. They just fired a guy.
They fired 3 people.
Yeah, but they fired their special teams coach, whom I think can be a head coach. And if we've learned nothing else, that in the Canadian Football League, David and I used to always laugh when they bring a new coach in up until about 4 or 5 years ago. And right, David, now all of a sudden they're bringing in these young guys, and these young guys are doing a great job.
Ryan Dinwiddie, when he was hired by the Argos, he was a quarterbacks coach. And people are like, quarterbacks coach? Really? But they saw something in him. They saw there are guys who in these positions they've had those thoughts of what can you they're in a position right now where they know the game. As long as they've been in the game for a while, like yeah, it's funny because you consider Dinwiddie young, but
what 45?
Ooh,
yeah, something like that.
I think he's like 43, 45, somewhere in there. He's in his early 40s.
Somewhere between 42 and 45.
So like, okay, Dinwiddie's 43. Okay,
that's between
his beard might not suggest it. Corey Mace is 38.
Exactly.
Okay, not for long after. Again, defensive line coach, defensive coordinator, then becomes a head coach. Right.
that in there also. The big thing about these young, successful coaches, they played in the league.
Yeah.
They played in the league. And they played and then coached.
There's another example, too, of not so much, but of taking a gamble on a coach and paying it off. And we've seen it because look at Jason Moss with Montreal.
Exactly. There you go.
He's the perfect, him and Corey Mace, that's why I feel like they're the coaches that are up for Coach of the Year, are the perfect examples of you come in with the right attitude. Because look, Corey Mace also, too, was getting fed to the wolves by his Rough Rider fans halfway through the season when the honeymoon phase ended. But both of them have come in with their message, and their message is prevailing. Like, look at just the bond Trevor Harris has. Look what AJ Ouellette's gone with Saskatchewan. That's why I'm saying with Ottawa, you got to make sure you bring in the right guys. I know Darius Pickett's been very vocal on social media. He's a free agent. You should look at bringing him back because he's a very vocal leader in the room. We know he was with Toronto. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but
Darius Pickett is also going to go for the best deal for himself. I hate to say it too,
but I'm just more looking at like you have to look at those guys who are the leaders. That's why I think like why they brought in Dominique Grimes, why they went out and got Justin Hardy,
Yep.
like guys like that who are older and more experienced. Because if you're just kind of going off that where you need that like good mix of younger guys but also older too, which is why Winnipeg's been as consistent as they are. That's why Toronto's building a great room with their leadership, with Daniels, with McManus, with Flo, etc.
I sometimes wonder when players leave, the interpretation becomes, well, they went for more money. Meanwhile, the team's not really disappointed that they're going. I know that happens too, right? I know that there's players that go for more money and the team goes, well, we didn't want him anyway. Let him go. That kind of that happens too, right?
Oh, yeah.
But to your point, David, yeah, there's some players that go to look for the money. Lemon's notorious for that, but he found a good situation in Montreal before, the crap hit the fan. So players can dictate in the Canadian Football League where they can go, and they can also dictate how well a team improves. I really get a sense that the players, they're not basketball. They don't have the same power as basketball players. But I do think there's a lot of players out there, especially when they start crawling past 30, that are saying, I want to win a Grey Cup. And maybe the money isn't that important. I'm sure there's the odd player that makes the sacrifice financially to stay. There's players that we don't know could have earned more, but they decided to stay. There's those players too. They're not all the same. They're all motivated by different things at different times.
Yeah, I mean, look, I also think Darius Pickett's a good player. He was sorely missed in Toronto this year.
He was sorely missed by Ottawa in the last couple.
Yep,
exactly right. While I criticize him going for more money, I also know that this was a player that when their team doesn't have him, they miss him.
Yep,
as well. Right, so there's a bit of that too.
But they can be replaced. To your point earlier, Griff, that you got to rebuild. The point is, there are a lot of players out there that were amazed at how good they are. Oh wow, where were they? Oh, they were on the practice roster, or they were on a practice roster and then they were grabbed by another team. There's a lot of players that Herslow comes to mind with the Argos. I was
about to say,
right? Those kinds of players. When you talk about Ottawa and keeping the players together, I'm not disagreeing with you, Griff, about keeping the team together, but basically keeping them mostly together.
More foundation
and tweaking a bunch of other stuff. Your point, I think, is that keep most of what you got. You're going to have to tweak it, because if you didn't have to tweak it, you would have made it to the Grey Cup this year. So obviously you got to make some change.
Don't strip the car down completely. Just fix a couple parts that need fixing.
Yeah. If you got a transmission, keep it. If you got a motor, keep it. And if you got a horn, keep it too. And a lot of teams, like you said, David, like Pickett, you need a horn on your team.
Yeah, I didn't realize you were giving out car advice.
Name of the podcast. If you got a horn, keep it too.
I've been to the mechanic too much. Obviously, that's what's going on.
The CFL mechanics here, guys. The big thing with just everything right now, because there's a couple guys on Hamilton that I look at as well from that standpoint of one who went there and one who stayed there. And I just said their defense was terrible, but there's a couple guys they have on their team that are very good. Jamal Peters was a welcome addition for them as well. He seems to like his role and what he's been doing in Hamilton. And then Stavros as well. I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name. These are guys, because I feel like more than just the team and the situation, but it's also the community, because that's the one thing the CFL has a lot of over other leagues is the community aspect of it and just the overall family aspect of it. So if you go to
Yeah.
a place, that's where, and this also ties back to Ottawa, because I feel like Ottawa is that team right now that, like, look, you don't know what to expect when you go there, because it's kind of like the island of misfit toys in the sense where there's not like that signature player. Like you look at BC, they got Vernon Adams Jr. You look at Saskatchewan, AJ Ouellette. You look at Brady Oliveira in Winnipeg. Toronto's got, I know he's under a lot of scrutiny right now, and look, he was a little rough with us last weekend, but Chad Kelly went to McManus, etc. with Toronto. And then Hamilton has all their players that like you could look to, and then Montreal does as well. Ottawa doesn't have that yet. So they're hoping, I think, either bring in guys who can become that or make sure Drew Brown gets the right tools to become that.
You talk to a lot of players. Their family is a big part of it too. Where they live is a big part. I mean, if you're a CFL player, Ottawa's not a bad place to live.
Yep.
Not as expensive as Toronto. Hamilton, maybe in a little bit, right? But but there's opportunity, right? For these guys there too. So they like those options for themselves. Let's call it that. But
yeah,
I do think that when you look at Ottawa specifically, that's a team where you want to be very careful, right? That you've taken positive steps. Don't do what BC has done. You made positive strides, but you try to reinvent the formula a little bit.
You over accessorize the car.
Yeah, you don't want to be in a position where you've taken steps forward, but then you go backwards, or you're too married to your plan. You have to be willing to compromise and make changes. Pinball Clemens has always said, "I don't want to be the smartest person in the room, because if you're the smartest person in the room, you're likely not going to listen to outside opinions, which sometimes can be very wise and very important." Although I have constantly heard that we may think one thing, but the teams don't, so they don't listen to us.
Yeah,
fair. I don't need you to listen to me. All right, I'm not there to give you advice. If I was, you'd be paying me. They're not paying me for that advice, right? But I think don't be stubborn in thinking that you have all the answers too, though, right? There's going to be a time where Ottawa is going to have to make some tough decisions, and they got to be willing to pull the plug on certain things, right?
Well, you're going back to what Griff said before. The tough part is making the decisions of the subtraction being addition, right? You're going to have to figure out what do you give up to get better, and all those decisions we've talked about all of them in a roundabout way, but quite frankly, there's a lot of ways to end up with a better team, a lot of ways, and the trick is to pull all the right levers. And I think the important thing is not, like you said, David. It comes down to that too, which is I think Hamilton's trying to adjust to, trying to have the brain trust to bring the team in. They didn't have the right defensive coordinator. So now it sounds like Jones is going to stay there. And I'm just using Hamilton as an example. Hamilton, if they have a quarterback that if Bo Levi Mitchell can be Bo Levi Mitchell most times, more often than not, and Hamilton can continue doing what they've done, which is help him to be offensively astute and clean up their defense, just like Edmonton, just like Ottawa, all these teams that you're talking about, guys, that's what they need to do. And the ones that hit each lever right, more levers right, they're the ones that are going to be there, this time. Just like Saskatchewan. What was the big change that Saskatchewan made? It was more than one, which is what my point is. It's more than one. They brought in a running back, they brought in a head coach, and they have a quarterback when he's healthy, right? It's a different team than they've had.
Which is something that Ottawa needs, because we saw it on Saturday. They tried throwing around, but then eventually teams are going to catch up to you and see, hey, you're doing this, we're going to take it away from you. We saw what happens when you make Drew Brown make mistakes. So if you can have a running game, kind of like that's the one common denominator that every single team that's remaining has for this weekend. Toronto
was it amazing they don't have a running back, so they were using receivers to run the ball.
Yeah, Braylon Addison specifically was fake. And
you can only do it for so long before teams catch on to what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean when they know you don't have the run going for you, it makes it a little easier to play call and understand where you're going to be, what you're going to be doing.
Good old predictability.
Yeah, exactly. Like, because if you look at the Saturday, though, you have Kadeem Carey, you have Walter Fletcher, you have Brady Oliveira, you have AJ Olette. You have four, for lack of a better word, you have four horses running back in the field, so that all four of those guys are probably going to be X factors in their game, which I think it's about time we talk about it. I'm going to get the graphic up here, but we got, first off, the CFL East final on Saturday with Montreal taking on Toronto. We know what happened last year. Everyone knows what happened last year. But Toronto's coming in with this is don't be the wave, we are the wave, or we are the wave. We know what their mood, their mantra in the locker room is. But do we think that it's going to be back-to-back to Montreal, or do we think Toronto gets past this proverbial line of last year?
Is that 52.5?
52.5 is the over-under for the game.
Okay, is that the Argo score?
No,
No,
both teams combined.
I know. I'm just
Oh.
you know what I mean? Is it the over/under for the Argos next week?
2 Rouges and a field goal.
Yeah, no, to your point, if last week was any indication, 52.5 won't be hard for them to, especially if Fajardo's on the ball, right? Because we know Kelly's in a good mood to air it out, right? And both their running games are pretty good, so that sets up the pass, and that sets up a lot of, and we learned another thing. One week we watched Ottawa Toronto, and possession time was dictated the score. And then we watched the next week, and it didn't. So the question is, the real question that I'm going to say, who's going to win this game? It's the big play team. Whichever team makes the most big plays, I think that's who's going to win with Montreal and Toronto, which means the defense making a mistake or making something good happen, because that's another big play. Like last year, I think once that interception happened and they got that touchdown against Toronto,
Marc-Anthony Dubois.
It was over. It was almost over at that point. So it's really important. The big play for these two teams, they feast on big plays.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the last time the Argos and the Alouettes played each other. The story of that game for Toronto, obviously, they pull off the win against Montreal in that one, but it was how they did it, right? It was ground game to a T in that one, right? Like, I'm pretty sure they finished with over 100 yards rushing just in the first half alone. They finished with, I'm just looking up, 234 rushing yards in that game, right? That makes it life so much. They had 517 yards of offense. 517 yards of offense.
The other quarterback broke the record.
Okay. Now, but the thing against Montreal, you might remember that was also the game where Cody Fajardo. Well, he also didn't have his best game, but Liam Hairolahu kicked 8 field goals. So if you're Montreal, you're thinking two things here. Yeah, they ran the ball a lot against us. Yeah, they put up a lot of yards against us, but it could have been worse for us. But it wasn't, because our defense limited the damage.
Bend, not break.
Right? If you're Toronto, the mantra's got to be, we cannot, and I repeat, we cannot allow this game to get away from us, because we're not capitalizing on mistakes in a way. And I remember in that game specifically, Chad Kelly at one point in the first half, I think it was near the end of the first half, he throws an interception, on a play that he should have thrown it away.
Yep.
He didn't do that last week against Ottawa, because everyone talks about they're going to try to make Chad Kelly make a mistake. And I think the mantra again will be the same. They're going to want Chad Kelly to make mistakes, because this defense is not good enough. In my opinion, Toronto's defense struggles when the opposing team commits turnovers.
Yeah.
It comes back to bite Toronto usually. It happened against Ottawa. The only reason why, in a lot of ways, the real reason why Ottawa was in that game, obviously they had a lot of possession time and they got down the field, but Toronto limited to a lot of field goals. But then once Ottawa shortened the field, a couple of fumbles in key areas, their offense was able to play a lot better, because high efficiency plays in the red zone. So if you're Toronto, the mantra's got to be, we cannot give Montreal easy field position, where to start, right? That's got to be the mantra for them.
Penalties as well have to be a big thing as well for this game, because if you give Montreal an inch, you're giving them a mile. One thing I look at for this as well is just what the defense we can say it now, Noel Thorpe, because I know we were trying to figure it out on our way to the train last Saturday. But with him, like, we know what he's been able to do the last couple of years in the playoffs in this regular season, that he's going to try to make his day hell. I think the more than anything for Toronto, it's about getting off to a fast start. So if they get the ball, go down the field and score. We know what happened last year with the pick six. I believe it was in the red zone too. If I'm not mistaken, or the interception was close to the goal line.
It was literally at the goal line, yeah.
Yeah, and Duquois ran it all the way back. So like, you can't even if you do like throw a red zone interception where he catches on the goal line, even if you don't do that, it's just going to be such a momentum killer, because we know Chad Kelly can make the big plays when it matters. Cody Fajardo, because remember, these are the last two Grey Cup champions duking it out. We know that both teams are capable of making the big players. If I had to label an X factor for either side, I'm going to look at the guys like, I know Coxie's questionable to play in this game, but I'm going to look at for Montreal, I'm going to look at a guy like Cole Speaker, who can emerge and make big plays when it matters. He had the really good third down catch last year in the Grey Cup. And I'm going to look at a guy like Dejon Brissett for the Toronto Argonauts. He had the great game against he had a couple plays last week, but the last game against Ottawa, he had 2 touchdowns. So he's kind of rounding back into form as he's getting healthy. So I'm going to look to see how the role players on Toronto are utilized in this game for both Toronto and Montreal. Because, we know they're going to cover that as well. The other thing, too, is, and Frank and I know this because Frank's talked to Dinwiddie about this, is Toronto's defense has got to get them off the field if it's 2nd and 10, 2nd and 15. You got to limit second down conversions in this game. It's going to be a big storyline. And if Toronto DBs can come to play, not saying go up there and be ball hawks and get interceptions. Just don't let Montreal, when they're clamping, back off from it. Don't let them fully clamp down. Because if they fully clamp down, it could be a long day. But when I look at this game, ultimately, I see it going one of two ways. I think either Toronto wins it close or Montreal runs away with it. Just because we don't know what we're going to get out of Toronto.
I think this game is is the biggest coin flip out of the 2 games, in my opinion. Toronto is hitting its stride at the right time. In a way, it's kind of a reverse of what's going to happen last year. Montreal was hitting their stride at the right time, and they pulled the opposite against Toronto. Toronto's now hitting their upside. Kelly's fresh. Kelly is, let's say it, a little more experienced now in these situations than he was last year.
Say he's focused?
Probably more focused. I wouldn't even say focused. I just think, humbled a little bit of what happened last time. And I think as much as they say they're not looking back to last year, they're looking into last year too. They don't want that happening again.
It's going to linger over them.
Yeah, we talked about a lot, but they're just trying to block it out.
Injury, but he's able to play, I think.
Yeah.
Looking at their injury report.
The only person ruled out is Isaiah Cage at the moment.
Cage, and then a few guys that are healthy scratches, I think.
Yeah.
But only injured person right now is Isaiah Cage has been ruled out. When I look at Montreal, their defense excels, when they force mistakes, when they are aggressive. And I was talking with Dinwiddie today, they feel like Montreal doesn't mind if you run the ball on them, as long as it doesn't lead to points being scored on them. They'll allow some of these run plays, but they're going to do their best to keep everything in front of them. They don't want to get beat deep, and Toronto's going to have to be patient. I think patience is going to be the key for Toronto in this game. They can't force anything.
Yep, we talked about in the press box against Ottawa. That was one of the turning points when Toronto was having a bit of trouble. Remember, David, we were talking about if Kelly's patient here, they could win this game, but he could be in the position now where if he's not patient, he could give the game to Ottawa.
You're trying to make too much out of too little.
And that's the patience he's talking about is very important.
It's huge in my opinion. It's huge for Toronto, and for Montreal, it's like, was Montreal holding back the last few weeks? They didn't have a very convincing end to the year. The BC game, they only scored 3 points. They gave Winnipeg a run for their money. I'll give them that, but that you still lost by 1 point, albeit it was a very weird situation at the end of the game there with the win and stuff. But you know, I look at it as if you're Toronto, you're gonna take the confidence of what you've been able to do the last few weeks. You've been the hottest team in the league, best offense really in this stretch.
Yep.
And you're just gonna say Montreal's gonna have to flat out and beat us, because Montreal, yes, they did win against Toronto this year, also lost twice against Toronto this year. So, and they only played Chad Kelly once, and Kelly wasn't exactly in this form when they did play against each other.
Yeah, what you're talking about, these are two teams that need to initiate, not react. They play their best when they're controlling the play.
Yeah.
Toronto needs to be in the position where they're initiating the action.
Yeah, because I think
Once
if Toronto
they get back on their heels, they're not that good defensively.
Yeah, because even like if Toronto were to go down like 10-0, it's gonna feel like they're down 30. You know, I don't think it's I think they got to keep it within a touchdown at all times. I think this is the kind of game where Toronto lets it get out of hand, or if they can't hit that gas pedal early enough, it could be a long day for them. I'm hoping I'm wrong, and I'm hoping Toronto wins. But at the end of the day with this one, how do we feel about the game? Do we think Toronto's going to win, or do we think it's going to be back-to-back Grey Cups for the Alouettes?
And we can't underestimate the home crowd either.
No,
so they're a bit of an impact too.
And the Birds.
I'm also weary of Montreal just because they are banged up too. Even though they've had the week off,
yes,
Austin Mack isn't 100%. He's expected to play from what I'm hearing, but how good is he going to be able to play? That's going to be a question mark there. Look, Cole Speaker's good. Tyler Sneed's good. Walton Fletcher's good. You know, Keon Julian Grant's pretty good. Are they better than what Toronto's going to put out there on offense? I think it's going to be close. I think Toronto will win this, but it's not going to be. It could go either way. It could be a Toronto narrow win. Personally, I think if Toronto's going to win this game, though, it's going to have to be one where they pull away. I don't know if that defense, if I can trust that defense with a close game, because they've struggled with them.
We've seen how they finish games lately.
You've seen how they, yeah, exactly, right? So,
but mind you, in Ottawa, they did the reverse, right? They did the opposite. They started.
Funny enough, you look at the CFL.ca writers, it is literally a half.
Yeah.
Both games, right? It just speaks to how close both games are.
I just ultimately think that with a game like this, it's such a toss-up, but at the end of the day, too, I'm going to use a pun that we've used all year, and I think that when it comes down to it, that Kadim's going to carry Toronto to victory.
Okay.
Kadim carries.
He had an okay game last week, but
he's a guy that we saw two Kadim carries against Ottawa. There was first half carry, second half carry. They were different.
Who had more carries?
Carey did.
Okay.
No, he had a better second half than he did first half. And the Argos figured out something with their offensive line, and they did some stuff, and they made it work a lot better in the second half. And I always say there's two things. The things that matter to me, plus minus for quarterbacks with interceptions and touchdowns. In other words, mistake-free play by the quarterback, not necessarily scoring touchdowns, but don't throw interceptions and turn the game over. But I really think in this case, it could be important to run and stop the run. I really think that's going to be the basis of how the game starts and maybe finishes.
It's going to be won and lost in the trenches.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I don't disagree. I think it does. I think it's one of those games that Toronto's like, I think defense has been obviously been better. There'll be some question marks, but I think I like where they're heading. I think they're in a good spot right now. But we'll see how that plays out.
You know what's going to be a lot of fun? Is watching this game at home, sitting on our couches, drinking free beer and eating free food. And then when the game's over, going, I want to ask a question. That's the part that's going to bother me. That's the last thing I wanted to say about that game, is we're not going to be able to talk to the coaches about it. irks me a little bit.
No, it's disappointing, but at the same time, too, it's going to
It
be.
is what it is.
It is what exactly. It is what it is. But moving on, also for side note for people out there, game is on 3:00 Saturday night, Saturday afternoon, TSN in Canada, CBS Sports Network in the United States, and at 6:30 p.m. we have the CFL West Final, where Winnipeg is looking to go to 29, 21, 22, 23, their fifth straight
Sixth.
Grey Cup. Oh,
Sixth.
sixth straight Grey Cup in a row. But Saskatchewan looking to get back to the big dance and win their first since 2013. And like I said earlier, beat Winnipeg for the first time in the playoffs since they won the Grey Cup in 2007.
How sweet would that be?
This is a game where, honestly, I believe it's already been sold out. They're on track to their fifth sellout of the year.
It already sold out like on Monday.
Yeah, the game's already sold out. 33,000 people in Princess Auto Stadium. The big question for here, more than anything, is does little brother beat big brother? And I'm not trying to throw anything against Saskatchewan, but we all know that Winnipeg's been the standard in the CFL for the last 5-6 years, where, look, there's a reason why they've gone to so many Grey Cups in a row. But the big question with them, too, is does what happened the last couple of years catch up to them? You know, where they got an easy path, not an easy path, because it's been a very difficult year for them. But you know how the last two Grey Cups have ended. Does that hold out and start to set in where we could lose 3 in a row? Or do they just show the rest of the CFL world we are who we are for a reason, and Saskatchewan, you're going to have to wait another year?
They have two similar problems. They have two quarterbacks that might buckle under pressure and two defenses that can make that pressure. Two defenses can make it happen. We've seen a chink in Collaros' armor, but for the most part, we've seen how good he really is.
And how good 20 is.
Yeah. And then Harris is somebody looking for an opportunity to do something really well. I sent him a text message. I said, good luck on the game. And I said something about when I remembered him as an Argo backup back in 2012. I was telling him, I told him then he looked like a good quarterback. And I'm glad to see you're finally going to have the success that you might, could have had before now. He said, what do you mean by that? I'm as successful as I want to be right now. And that kind of caught me by surprise. I guess what I'm trying to say is that this is a guy who was there with Collaros. They were together in 12, sitting in a restaurant, talking to fans while they ate, and their dreams were all in front of them. Ricky Ray was the quarterback. And to me, that's the storyline here from the quarterback perspective. And they're both going to get a chance to prove which one of them is better. And I don't know. I think Harris is up going up, and Collaros he's flying good. But this might be Harris's year. He might get a chance finally to do something.
I do think that I like what I've seen from Saskatchewan the last few weeks. We haven't even really talked about AJ Ouellette, who, back when the Argos won that Grey Cup in 2022, it was like there was a case to be made that he should have been given the Grey Cup MVP. But Henoch had the big game-changing play with that interception. I think he deserved the best Canadian in that game. Kind of think that AJ Ouellette was robbed a little bit, right? And the thing about Winnipeg, they're going to want to take AJ Ouellette out of the equation.
They have to.
Yep.
They're going to have to.
Who burned him 2 years ago in the Grey Cup.
Right? But let's not forget that Saskatchewan can win different ways. Right? That defense, you talked about it, Frank. Like Zach Collaros, what was his big problem early in the year? Throwing a lot of interceptions, right? It felt like a quarterback who wasn't too sure, right? If you get pressure on Zach Collaros, we've seen it. He crumbles a little bit. And we all know that the running back's it's a battle of the running backs. Which quarterback is going to have the better playmakers? Kenny Law is probably still the best receiver in this game. Debsky's good. Wilson is good. I think Saskatchewan
Schaefer Baker.
Yeah, Schaefer. But Saskatchewan, as we've said, they've got good pieces too, right? And the one thing that obviously everyone knows will be in Winnipeg's favor is being at home.
Yeah.
That crowd will be on their side. They're in a familiar position.
Cold and loud.
Yeah, cold and loud. But you, and look, the thing is they've had Winnipeg's number this year for the most part. That's usually not always the best thing to have happen because you learn from your mistakes eventually.
Yeah.
But let's also not forget, pretty sure 2 of those games, Trevor Harris wasn't even the quarterback.
There you go.
I think one of them he was, and that was just when he was coming back. Right? So Saskatchewan has had some decent form the last few weeks. Their offense is, I don't want to say they have an explosive offense. It's an offense that needs to be efficient and has to keep the turnovers down. They won't, I think that they're going to have to make Winnipeg play a more patient game on defense. They're going to be aggressive. Saskatchewan can't force anything. Winnipeg's game is going to be, we're going to see, will they load the box against Brady Oliveira? Will that give us the opportunity to take some shots? But you got to be careful when you're challenging these DBs on the Rough Riders because they got some playmakers, and that's the way Corey Mace wants to play. He wants turnovers. He already found the formula to beat this team in the Grey Cup when he was with Toronto in 2022, and you look at the games Winnipeg has lost in the last few weeks. Finding ways to get pressure on Zach Collaros is impairment on being able to find a way to win. So I think this is going to be a very big defensive game. I think rain could potentially be in the forecast too. That throws wrinkles into things. It always does.
Yeah.
Weather.
One thing with this too, I just looked this up quickly. Remember this date, gentlemen, September the 8th, 2018. That's the last time the Rough Riders won a game inside what was then IG Field, which is now Princess Auto Stadium. So it's been 6 years since they've won inside that stadium. And like we said, too, it's been 17 years since they won in the playoffs. The big thing with me, and I was also looking at this too, I do think this is going to be the more defensive game. I think if you look at like from a gambling standpoint, the overs and unders, I think it's more likely that the Toronto game goes over its total and this game goes under its total. I can see like a 24-17 kind of football game here, 23-20, like where it's just
they're going to be the under.
It's going to be the under. It's going to be gritty, just hold the other team down and go. Looking at the odds too, it is -3.5 for Winnipeg right now, and that's -120. So the books are basically saying that they expect a comfortable Winnipeg win. But my thing is too, though,
weather guarantees the run.
This one is about this game more than anything is not about who can shut down what receiving core, because we know what both receiving cores are capable of. This one is about stopping the ground and pound. If you can halt Brady Oliveira or AJ Ouellette, which, look, those aren't going to be easy things to do. Brady Oliveira is probably going to win his neck. He's going to win MOP next week in Vancouver, probably actually a week from tonight on the CFL Plus at 10:30 p.m. Eastern. CFL, give me the money for that. But with this game right here, too, this is the one where mistakes are going to burn you. We know, because here's the thing, too. Apart from these being both good defenses, and I know O'Shea was a special teams coach when he got hired from Toronto to go to Winnipeg. We got to remember, though, he was a linebacker and a heck of a linebacker for his CFL career, and Corey Mace played defense, too. But more than anything, this is the game that, look, if Winnipeg wins, they're going to hold over Rough Riders fans' heads, even if they were to go to the Grey Cup and lose. And for the Rough Riders, it's the exact same thing. So there's a lot on the line, on the field, off the field. This is going to be that barn burner, slobber knocker of a football game that, look, if you love this sport and you love this game, you're going to love. But if you're coming here if you're expecting fireworks, you're going to be disappointed. Like, that's the big thing here. But like I said, there's a lot that plays into this. And I'm going to say this. I would love to see Saskatchewan win. That's my heart pick. But my mind's telling me don't bet against the Bombers in the playoffs.
Well, it's hard to do. This is Banjo Bowl Plus. So, the fan bases, they know each other really well. And you're right. This is a game that both teams want to win and both their fan bases want to win. I'm going with Saskatchewan for only one reason. I really think that Saskatchewan's ready to do something big. they were ready to do something big a couple of years ago, and then they hit. I don't know what happened. They just ended up not being who they could be, and I think they might be ready this year. And it's something that Harris really wants really bad, and I can see,
It's like that Cody Fajardo story from last year.
yeah, kind of.
No, I mean in the whole sense of like you want to get over the hump and show the world that I can win the big games and I can lead a team to a victory and a championship.
And he's got a young coach, a first-year coach. There's parallels here, but I think the most important thing to say is that I really think the toughest part that's going to happen is for Caleros. I think I think Saskatchewan, if they get to him, they're going to nullify his game. And I think Harris obviously has had problems with injuries, and we worry about quarterbacks' health, especially at their ages. So there's a lot of X factors that we don't know that could change everything. What happens if Ouellet gets hurt in the first quarter? Because there's going to be ground, like you're calling it ground and pound. Well, it's going to be ground and pound, all right. It's going to be physical. That game,
it's going to be a very physical game. I wonder if whatever team wins is going to be a little hard, being tough with the Grey Cup. How good they'll, how if injuries are going to play a factor. But I think the ground game is going to be important for both teams. Winnipeg, I have a little more faith that they're going to be able to do more because they're very patient with the run game. They go to it that often. They're going to give Brady Oliveira a lot of carries. AJ will get his carries too. He had 14, I think, in the West semi final. But Trevor Harris likes to throw it too. Zach Caleros is very comfortable letting Brady Oliveira take the workload. But it'll be interesting to see which team has the game-changing plays. I think Winnipeg will they're both equally matched. There's a lot of equality on both sides of the field for these teams. It's just which team is going to make that big play, that game-changing play, and take momentum. Momentum's going to be key.
Well, they got a lot of big play candidates on the team, so it's going to be interesting to be sure. But it's going to be your basic football game. This is the most basic football game we're going to see. It's going to be more basic than the one that Toronto is playing against Montreal. This one here is going to be it's going to be watching two heavyweights go at it. It's going to be really interesting.
One's going to be about who gets the ball last, and one's going to be about who gets that last knockout blow in. Because also with Saskatchewan too, this is why they brought in AJ Ouellet. They were ready for this. But then with Winnipeg too, though, is it that time where, look, the clock strikes midnight, and because we all know, look, we don't know where the team's going in the long term just because they're coming towards the end. The clock's, like we say, the sun's starting to come back up the sun's starting to set on them. They're older. We don't know who's going to be back next year. They have a lot of aging veterans. So it's just about that one last chance to glory and also to erase the last 2 years of history. But then with Saskatchewan, and I'll say this too, you're saying without BC in the Grey Cup, if Saskatchewan, and it might affect it there, if Saskatchewan gets there, that vibe is going to be extremely high all week in Vancouver.
That fan base travels well.
Oh, yeah.
They'll gobble up any last minute ticket.
Green. In a way, I think either team the CFL will be happy with, but especially the Rough Riders, because they haven't been there. Haven't been there in a minute.
I don't know if they've been there since 2013, but I know that was the last year they won.
They haven't been there since.
No, they haven't been there since.
They've been close. They haven't been there.
They're also the best story to win it all because how the other three teams were the last three Grey Cup champions. No disrespect to the Argonauts, who we love or hate, or who we love, excuse me, and with Montreal as well, and with Winnipeg. But like we say, if you want a good, compelling story and to see a team that rises back to glory after a long time, Saskatchewan's the team for you. But every team has a compelling story, like I say. Saskatchewan, it's about returning to glory. Winnipeg, it's about, just adding to your legacy. Toronto, it's about, in the year where you were doubted, rewriting a lot of wrongs. And with Montreal, it's about being the gold standard.
You know what we learned in the last couple of Grey Cup games? We learned that Winnipeg can get rattled. They can be rattled.
Yep.
And this being their third crack at a Grey Cup, I'm going to use a hockey term. Are they going to grip their sticks a little too hard? Because I think while Saskatchewan has more to win, I think we all agree there. They have more to win. I think Winnipeg has more to lose,
Oh, absolutely.
right, in this game.
Absolutely. That's the big thing too, because of all these teams, like Saskatchewan knows we can build on this from next year. Montreal knows even if they lose, we'll be back next year. Toronto's the same thing too. That's why I say with Winnipeg, the sun's starting to come up or starting to set, however which way you want to put it.
And how they react to the fact that they don't or aren't winning is going to be interesting. I don't know if it means anything, but that hockey term comes to mind when I think about Winnipeg and in the situation they're in. The sticks, they might grip the sticks a little too hard.
Meanwhile, Mr. Morisuti, who do you have winning the West Final?
I have Saskatchewan, but I think it's gonna be close.
Yeah,
That's
like
two Saskatchewans in a Winnipeg. And
What's
actually,
what's the spread for this game, Griff?
3.5.
ooh, it's
Yeah.
wider than the Argo game.
Argos are in plus. Argos is -2.5 for Montreal. This game is -3.5. And fun fact too, with betting wise for the Grey Cup, the last 2 years in a row, Toronto, Montreal were both the underdogs, and they both went outright.
Well,
I don't know if whatever team makes, if Toronto, Montreal, I don't know if they're going to be heavy underdogs this time around.
Nope.
So
I honestly think that, and this is the beautiful thing about the CFL. It's truly it's anyone's game. Like you can make a case for any one of these any of two of the 4 teams getting to Vancouver, and you can make a case for any of the 4 teams to win because they're the teams that look, they deserve the most to be there, and they're the teams that have different stories on how they got there, and that's what's going to be exciting. That's what we're going to watch this coming Saturday. But gentlemen, before we wrap up, do you have any final words?
and we don't let me leave folks underestimating my belief in how physical the Toronto Montreal game will be. That game will be physical too. Just that the beef's a little bigger in the other game. That's the only difference. But the pounding's going to be the same.
One's a trilogy and one's a rivalry.
One's middleweights going crazy, and the other one's the heavyweights. If you go by the running backs, right? If you go by the running backs,
yeah, I think it's going to be a very fit. Both games are going to be very physical. I think it's going to be it's going to be spectacular football, and I just hope we get really good competitive games. I don't want any blowouts. I never liked blowouts. Last year wasn't great for that reason. I just wanted to be a good battle until the end.
I want to see the 2021 West Final all over again, where it comes down to one play that just sends a team to the Grey Cup.
Wow. That's hey, there's nothing wrong with that. And if you guys are right about the Montreal-Toronto game, the last possession could decide it. And the question is, do either of these games go into overtime? If there's a candidate for overtime, my money would be on the Montreal-Toronto game going to overtime, more than it would be the Saskatchewan-Winnipeg. I
completely agree. I think that the East Final is the one that's more likely to go to overtime. I think whoever wins the West, it's going to be they truly wanted it within 60 minutes of football. But anyway, you guys check them out. David Morisuti, Frank Stanishi, Double Blue Insider, Candid Frank Live. Guys, have a great time in Vancouver. I'll be there in spirit. Hopefully next year in Winnipeg, we can run it back. But anyway, viewers, CFL, check it out. You got football on Saturday. It's going to be great. This has been episode number 324, YWC Football Talk. Episode 325 coming up next.